"Do not come closer, or the chains will claim you too," a voice whispered through the wind as Emily Carter froze at the edge of the snow-dusted clearing, her breath forming clouds in the bitter northern air. The world around her was hushed, only the occasional creak of frost-laden branches and the distant howl of a lone wolf breaking the silence. Yet the warning felt alive, pulsating through her veins. She adjusted the woolen cloak around her shoulders, her fingers brushing against the worn leather strap of her satchel, heart thudding like a drum against her ribs. For years, she had walked the frozen edges of the northern forests, unseen, unheard, and unclaimed by any pack, her Omega status a whisper of shame in a land that revered strength above all else. Today, drawn by a story half-remembered from childhood, a tale of a monstrous wolf bound in iron chains at the heart of Iron Hollow, she had followed the thread of curiosity and unease into a place no traveler dared to tread. Each step through the knee-deep snow left a crisp imprint, the white expanse stretching endlessly, broken only by the jagged cliffs and dark pines framing the valley below. A faint glimmer caught her eye, glinting like silver in the moonlight, and she knew, without understanding why, that she was near. Her pulse quickened as she descended toward the source, boots crunching over brittle ice, the cold seeping into her bones, yet her resolve never wavered. Then she saw him. At first, he seemed like a shadow among the rock and snow, a hulking shape pressed against the ground, taut chains coiling around massive limbs, the metal cold and rigid even in the faint starlight. Emily's chest tightened, a wave of empathy rising in her throat, and she knelt at the edge of the precipice, reaching a gloved hand toward the beast whose eyes, bright, intelligent, and impossibly ancient, met hers with a gaze that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the night. The chains rattled faintly as the wolf stirred, his breath misting in the frigid air, and for a moment, Emily felt a jolt, a strange certainty that whatever danger this creature embodied, he was not just an animal. She whispered softly, "I'm here to help," and the sound of her voice carried across the clearing, small yet unwavering. Around her, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of iron and something far older, something commanding and regal, yet hidden beneath the tangle of fur and frost. Emily's hands trembled, not from cold, but from the realization that the story she had sought for years had not been exaggerated. She inched closer, eyes scanning the intricate knots of the chains, each link etched with runes faintly glowing in the moonlight, whispering of magic and history. Her fingertips brushed the ice-cold metal, and a shiver ran up her spine, yet she did not recoil. Something in her heart told her this moment, this choice to step forward, would change everything. The wolf's gaze never wavered, steady and searching, as if it knew she was the one who had been meant to find him, to bridge the distance between suffering and salvation. In that frozen clearing, beneath a sky streaked with stars and the pale glow of the moon, Emily Carter, the overlooked Omega, took her first step into a story far larger than herself, her soul entwined with a destiny she was only beginning to glimpse, the chains before her both a barrier and a promise of a revelation yet to come. Emily hesitated at the edge of the clearing, her breath catching in the cold air as she surveyed the tangle of iron chains and frost-covered ground. She had only a few silver coins left from her journey, each one painstakingly saved from the modest work she performed in the distant village, and the thought of spending them on the care of a creature she barely understood made her stomach twist with uncertainty. Still, the pull she felt toward the chained wolf was undeniable, a magnetic force that seemed to whisper directly to her heart. With deliberate steps, she approached, boots crunching softly against the icy snow, the moonlight catching the edges of her cloak and illuminating the determination etched across her face. As she knelt beside the massive creature, her gloved hands hovered for a moment above the cold metal, feeling the subtle vibration of restrained energy, and then she placed them gently against the nearest link, testing its weight and the rigidity of the iron. The wolf lifted his head slightly, eyes locking onto hers with an intelligence that startled her, and Emily could swear she felt recognition in that gaze, a silent understanding bridging the distance between human and beast. Her fingers traced the worn chain, noticing the faint runes carved into its links, glowing softly in the lunar light, hinting at an ancient magic she did not yet comprehend. She took a deep breath, counting silently, and whispered reassurances, her voice barely carrying over the hush of the forest. She imagined carefully guiding the wolf from the icy pit, supporting his weight and easing the tension in the chains without drawing attention from the shadows that flitted just beyond the clearing. Each movement was calculated, precise, and filled with a reverence born of empathy and curiosity, as though she were performing a ritual she did not fully understand but felt compelled to honor. Emily retrieved her satchel, pulling out strips of cloth and soft rope, improvising a way to cushion the wolf and prevent further discomfort as she prepared to maneuver him. The snow beneath her knees was unforgiving, cold seeping through layers of wool and leather, yet she did not allow it to distract her from the task at hand. She murmured softly to the wolf, telling him that she meant no harm, that she wished only to see him free, her words carrying a soothing cadence that seemed to settle the creature as it shifted slightly, easing the strain on its joints. A distant howl echoed through the valley, sharp and poignant, and Emily's heart leapt with awareness that other beings, perhaps more like the wolf than she herself, were present and observing, yet she did not falter. Carefully, she worked to loosen the simplest of the chains, testing each movement to ensure it would not trigger resistance or pain, her hands steady despite the chill and her racing heartbeat. With a final gentle tug, one link shifted just enough to allow a small motion, and the wolf responded with a subtle, approving glance, his amber eyes reflecting trust in a way that warmed her despite the frost. Emily smiled faintly, feeling a surge of connection that went beyond understanding, a sense that this encounter was meant to happen, that her choice to step forward was already changing the path of both their lives. She settled into the snow beside him, arms hovering protectively, listening to his steady breathing and the whisper of wind through the pines, knowing that each quiet moment, each careful action, was bringing them closer to the moment of release, the moment when the first true bond between Omega and King would begin to take shape under the cold silver light of the northern moon. Emily spent hours tending to the wolf, her movements careful and deliberate, her eyes never leaving his, watching for any sign of discomfort or distress. She adjusted the padding beneath his massive paws, ensuring that the cold iron did not dig further into his fur, and whispered encouragements in a soft, steady voice that carried more than words could convey. The forest around them seemed to bend into quiet, as if respecting the sacred connection forming in that frozen clearing. Each night, after the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily would build small fires at a safe distance, casting gentle warmth toward the wolf, the flames flickering over the runes etched into the chains, illuminating their faint, mysterious glow. She discovered that when she rested her hands against him, her own heartbeat slowed, and the wolf's breathing became more measured, as if he responded to the calm steadiness she provided. Over days, she noted subtle changes. His eyes, once wary and guarded, now followed her with trust, and he began to shift his weight to ease the tension on his limbs, allowing her to explore new ways to relieve the strain without causing alarm. Emily realized she was learning his rhythm, the way he reacted to her touch, the small nuances that signaled comfort or agitation, and she felt a swell of pride that she could bring relief where no one else had succeeded. One night, a gentle snow began to fall, coating the clearing in a pristine layer of white, and Emily knelt beside the wolf, her breath forming clouds as she whispered soothing phrases. She noticed a warmth radiating from her hands, subtle but undeniable, that seemed to respond to the magic etched into the chains, and she experimented lightly, letting the sensation flow into the links. A faint hum rose from the runes, resonating with the warmth of her hands, and for the first time, she felt the chains loosen imperceptibly under the combined force of her touch and the moonlight. The wolf lifted his head, amber eyes reflecting the silver glow of the snow, and Emily understood that something ancient and powerful was awakening within him. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of responsibility and destiny settle upon her shoulders, yet she did not falter. The connection between them deepened with each hour. The wolf's subtle movements guided her hands, as if he were silently teaching her the right pressure, the perfect angle, and the timing required to free him from the binding. Emily's own senses heightened in response, noticing the faintest vibrations in the frozen ground, the shift of wind carrying distant scents, and the hushed calls of creatures far off in the night. She realized that in this quiet, suspended world, every choice mattered, every action carried significance beyond immediate comprehension. The snowflakes that landed on her cloak and hair melted with the warmth she radiated, a small but potent reminder that even in the harshest northern winter, life could be nurtured and preserved. As she adjusted a particularly stubborn chain around his shoulder, her gaze met his once more, and she felt a silent acknowledgement, a communication that transcended words. He trusted her, and she would not fail. Emily understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, yet in that moment, surrounded by the whispering pines and silvered snow, she felt the fragile but undeniable stirrings of hope, the sense that her careful, patient attention was awakening more than just freedom from the chains. It was awakening a bond that had been written long before she had set foot in the frozen clearing, a bond that would guide them both toward a destiny neither fully understood but both were destined to meet. The wind shifted sharply, carrying with it the faint scent of movement and the distant echo of footsteps across the frozen valley. Emily stiffened, eyes scanning the shadows among the pines, and her hand instinctively went to the satchel at her side, ready to use whatever small tools she had to protect the wolf. She realized that the weeks she had spent tending him had not gone unnoticed, subtle traces of their presence. The disturbed snow, the faint glow of runes, had left clues that others could follow. From behind a cluster of frost-laden trees, she glimpsed figures approaching, their movements deliberate and silent, yet their purpose clear. They were hunters, or perhaps scavengers, though she could not tell which, drawn by the same stories that had led her here, stories of a wolf bound in chains with a power not fully understood by those who feared it. Emily's pulse quickened, but she did not waver. She shifted closer to the wolf, murmuring words of reassurance that were more instinct than language, feeling his presence respond to her calm, steady voice. The snow crunched beneath the hunter's boots as they drew nearer, and Emily took a careful breath, calculating the path that would allow her to keep him hidden. Her eyes traced the contours of the clearing, noting every shadow and every nook that could offer concealment, each thought moving in tandem with the rhythm of her companion. The wolf's ears flicked, sensing the subtle vibrations in the ground, and Emily recognized the silent communication between them, a language forged in trust and shared danger. She gently laid a hand along his shoulder, letting him feel the steadiness of her touch, and together they moved with careful coordination, sidestepping toward a cluster of dense pines that would shield them from sight. The hunters paused briefly, scanning the clearing with sharp, deliberate gestures, their conversation muted by the distance, but their intentions clear in posture and gaze. Emily's heart pounded, not from fear alone but from the acute awareness that each decision she made could shift the balance of the moment. She whispered softly to the wolf, guiding him as they ducked under low-hanging branches, the snow falling in delicate flakes that clung to her hair and cloak. Her breath steamed in the cold air, mingling with the faint scent of pine and the residual iron tang from the chains, and she felt a surge of determination, a recognition that she had stepped into a role far larger than herself. The wolf moved with her cues, shifting his weight and adjusting his posture to navigate the uneven terrain, each subtle motion reinforcing the bond that had grown between them. Emily's mind raced with strategies, imagining paths that would take them beyond the reach of the hunters, into the deeper forests where the trees grew thick and the snow muffled all sound. She felt the energy in the air shift, a quiet anticipation, and knew that the coming hours would test her resourcefulness and her courage. Yet in that moment, crouched beside him beneath the sheltering boughs, she felt a calm determination settle in her chest, a steady certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, that every step taken to protect him was also a step towards something greater, a connection that neither she nor the wolf fully understood, but that promised to reshape their fates as the moonlight traced silver patterns across the snow. The night deepened around the northern forest as Emily remained hidden beneath the shelter of ancient pines, her breath steady despite the uncertainty pressing against her chest. The distant figures eventually disappeared beyond the ridge, their presence fading into the endless sea of snow and darkness. But the unease they left behind lingered. She knew they would return. Stories like this did not stay buried forever. Slowly, she turned her attention back to the wolf beside her. Moonlight spilled through the branches overhead, bathing his dark fur in silver light. For a moment, everything seemed strangely still. Then she noticed it. The runes carved into the chains were glowing brighter than before. Emily frowned and leaned closer. During the weeks she had spent caring for him, the markings had always carried a faint shimmer, but now they pulsed softly like distant stars. A gentle warmth spread through her fingertips as she reached toward the nearest link. The moment her skin brushed the cold iron, the warmth intensified. She gasped softly. It felt as though something buried deep inside her was responding. Not fear, not pain, recognition. The wolf immediately lifted his head. His amber eyes locked onto hers, alert and focused. Emily swallowed hard. The sensation moved through her hands and into her arms like sunlight flowing beneath her skin. She had never experienced anything like it. Growing up as an overlooked Omega, she had been told repeatedly that she possessed nothing special. No rare gifts, no remarkable abilities, no destiny worth mentioning. Yet the energy building inside her seemed to disagree. The glowing runes brightened further, illuminating the surrounding snow in pale silver patterns. Emily quickly pulled her hand back, startled by the reaction. The light dimmed, but did not disappear completely. Her heart raced. She looked at the wolf. He continued watching her with that same intelligent expression, almost as if he had expected this to happen. The realization sent a shiver through her. For the first time, she began to wonder if their meeting had truly been an accident. The wind drifted through the trees, carrying loose snowflakes across the clearing. Emily sat quietly beside him, replaying every moment since she had arrived at Iron Hollow. The strange pull she had felt, the immediate trust between them, the way the chains reacted to her touch. None of it made sense, yet all of it felt connected. Suddenly, a low hum echoed from the iron restraints. Emily's attention snapped back to the chains. Fine cracks of silver light were spreading through the carved runes. They were not breaking. They were changing, awakening. The wolf rose slightly despite the weight surrounding him. His gaze shifted toward the moon overhead. Emily followed his eyes. Clouds were slowly parting across the night sky, revealing a brilliant full moon suspended above the northern wilderness. Its light poured across the clearing like liquid silver. The hum intensified. Emily instinctively reached forward again. This time she did not hesitate. Warmth flooded through her hands as soon as they touched the chains. The silver cracks expanded. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Snow lifted gently from the ground and drifted in slow circles around them. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel something enormous stirring beneath the surface of the world, something ancient and patient that had waited a very long time for this exact moment. Then, for the briefest second, she heard a voice. Not through her ears, through her heart. Deep, calm, familiar. You found me. Emily froze. Her eyes widened as she stared at the wolf. He had not moved. His mouth remained closed. Yet she knew without question where the words had come from. The connection between them had finally awakened, and somewhere beyond the chains, beyond the snow and moonlight, destiny had begun to open its eyes. The voice echoed through Emily's mind long after the words had faded, leaving her frozen beneath the silver glow of the moon. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the wind moving through the trees. She stared at the wolf, searching for an explanation, but all she found was the same steady gaze that had followed her from the very beginning. The connection between them no longer felt imagined. It felt real, ancient, unavoidable. Emily slowly reached toward the chains again. The moment her fingertips brushed the iron, the glowing runes brightened with startling intensity. Light spread through every carved symbol, flowing across the restraints like silver rivers. The wolf rose higher this time, his massive form surrounded by a faint radiance that seemed to blend with the moonlight itself. Snow drifted around them in slow circles. The forest became silent, completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Emily could feel power gathering inside the clearing. Not dangerous power, not chaotic power. Something older, something that felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The chains began to hum louder. One by one, The glowing runes faded from the iron links, as if the magic holding them together had finally completed its purpose. Emily took a step back, shielding her eyes from the growing brightness. The wolf remained perfectly still. Then the light expanded. It surrounded him completely, forming a brilliant silver veil that stretched several feet into the air. Emily's breath caught. She could no longer see the wolf clearly. Only shifting outlines moved within the radiance. Her pulse raced. Every instinct told her she was witnessing something impossible. The light swirled faster. The clearing filled with warmth despite the winter air. Snowflakes melted before they could touch the ground. Emily felt the strange energy flowing through her again, stronger now than ever before. The connection between her and the figure inside the light deepened until she could almost feel another heartbeat beside her own. Then everything stopped. The glow faded. Silence returned. Standing where the wolf had been was a man. Emily stared in complete disbelief. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair touched by moonlight, and silver eyes she recognized instantly. The same eyes that had watched her from beneath the chains. The same eyes that had followed her every day she returned to the clearing. He wore simple dark clothing that seemed untouched by the snow around him. His posture was calm and steady, carrying a quiet authority that made the entire forest feel smaller. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Emily struggled to process what she was seeing. Every story she had heard as a child suddenly rushed back into her memory. Legends of rulers who could walk between forms. Ancient kings blessed by the moon. Figures so powerful their names became history. The stranger's gaze softened as it settled on her. There was gratitude there, relief, and something else she could not yet understand. "Emily," he said quietly. Hearing her name spoken aloud sent a chill through her. She had never told him her name. Not once. The realization stole her breath. The man offered a small smile, the first sign of warmth she had seen from him. "You have been protecting me for weeks." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. Questions crowded her thoughts faster than she could ask them. Who was he? Why had he been imprisoned? How did he know her name? The stranger seemed to understand her confusion. He looked toward the distant northern mountains rising beyond the forest. Moonlight reflected in his silver eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried the calm certainty of someone born to command. "My name is Alexander Northwood." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Every child in the north knew that name. Every village, every pack, every kingdom. Alexander Northwood was not merely a leader. He was the ruler whose banners flew across the entire northern territory. The king of the north. And suddenly Emily understood why the chains had been hidden so far from civilization. She understood why strangers had been searching these woods. Most importantly, she understood why destiny had led her to Iron Hollow. She had not rescued an abandoned creature. She had rescued a king. Alexander Northwood took a slow step forward, his presence commanding the clearing as though the entire forest had bent itself in respect. Emily could feel the shift in the air, a quiet power that radiated from him, tangible and steady, wrapping around the trees and snow in a way that made every leaf and branch seem to pause. The wolf, now fully restored to human form, stood tall and calm, but the aura surrounding him left no doubt in Emily's mind that he was no ordinary man. He raised a hand, and the faint shimmer of moonlight seemed to gather around his palm, stretching outward, illuminating the clearing with a soft glow. Emily instinctively moved closer, her heart racing not with fear, but with the realization that she was witnessing the full measure of the figure she had been protecting. Slowly, Alexander spoke, his voice deep and measured, carrying across the forest with the weight of command. "All who dwell in these lands must recognize their place," he said, and the words felt less like a command and more like the undeniable truth. Emily felt a strange calm settle over her, as though the tension of the last weeks had been released by the simple clarity of his presence. She glanced at the horizon and could see small figures in the distance, their movement deliberate as they approached, drawn by the same ancient knowledge that had guided her to this moment. Emily realized that Alexander's reach extended far beyond the forest, that he had been a ruler even when chained and hidden, and that his acknowledgement of her efforts would change everything. She took a careful step forward, encouraged by the subtle motion of his gaze that seemed to invite her closer. And in that instant she understood that the bond forming between them was recognized not just by the wolf or the man, but by the very land itself. Alexander bent slightly, his eyes locking with hers, and in that gaze Emily felt the unspoken acknowledgement of courage, of devotion, and of the role she had played in restoring what had been lost. The air seemed to shimmer with a quiet intensity, and for a brief moment, all sound and motion outside the clearing faded, leaving only the presence of the two of them. Snow drifted lazily from the trees, catching in Emily's hair and cloak, yet neither of them paid it any mind, both caught in the silent exchange that conveyed more than words could. Then Alexander extended a hand, steady and sure, not commanding but inviting, and Emily hesitated only a moment before placing her palm against his. The warmth that spread through her body was both reassuring and electrifying, a reminder that her choice to protect him had set in motion forces she could barely comprehend. Around them, the forest seemed to exhale, and Emily realized that in this quiet, suspended moment, the entire northern wilderness had witnessed her actions, acknowledged them, and was now aligned with the awakening of a ruler and the rise of someone who had proven herself worthy of standing beside him. The clearing, bathed in silver moonlight, felt infinite, and Emily knew with a certainty that went beyond thought that this moment and this connection would define the path for both of them, as the north itself seemed to bow in recognition of what had transpired. 3 days later, the capital of the north stood beneath a sky of pale silver clouds as Emily crossed the towering gates of Northwatch for the first time in her life. The city seemed impossible. Massive stone walls stretched hundreds of feet into the air. Silver banners moved gently in the winter wind. Thousands of people filled the streets below, their voices blending into a distant hum that echoed through the avenues. Emily had spent her entire life being overlooked, yet now every gaze seemed drawn toward her. She walked beside Alexander through the heart of the city, her simple cloak standing in sharp contrast to the noble families gathered along the main boulevard. Whispers followed them everywhere. Some were curious, others were doubtful. Emily lowered her eyes and focused on the rhythm of her footsteps, trying to ignore the weight of attention pressing against her shoulders. The Grand Council Hall rose above the city center like a mountain of carved stone and glass. As they entered, rows of nobles, advisors, pack leaders, and representatives from across the north stood waiting. The room fell silent. Emily immediately sensed the change in the atmosphere. This was not the warm acceptance she had imagined. Questions filled the room. Suspicion filled the room. Alexander moved forward without hesitation. His presence commanded immediate respect, yet Emily could feel dozens of eyes studying her. She heard fragments of conversation drifting through the chamber. A village Omega, an outsider, an ordinary girl. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. For a moment, old fears returned. The fears she thought she had left behind in the forest. Alexander took his place before the council. The room remained silent as the oldest advisor stepped forward. His expression was respectful but cautious. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "many here wish to understand why this young woman stands beside you." Emily's stomach tightened. The entire chamber seemed to wait for the answer. Alexander glanced toward her. His silver eyes held the same calm certainty they had held in the clearing at Iron Hollow. Then he turned back to the council. "Because she is the reason I stand before you today." His voice carried effortlessly through the hall. No one interrupted. No one challenged him. While others feared what they did not understand, she chose compassion. While others searched for power, she offered kindness. While others abandoned hope, she remained. The silence deepened. Emily felt heat rise behind her eyes. No one had ever spoken about her that way before. Alexander continued. "You see an Omega from a forgotten village. I see the person who changed. The fate of this kingdom." The words moved through the chamber like a wave. Faces that had been skeptical moments earlier now showed uncertainty, reflection, respect. Emily slowly lifted her head. For the first time in her life, she did not feel invisible. She did not feel small. She stood taller, not because she had changed, but because someone had finally seen her clearly. As the meeting concluded, the nobles stepped aside. One by one, they bowed their heads. Not deeply, not formally, but enough. Enough for Emily to understand that something fundamental had shifted. Later that evening, She stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city lights. Snow drifted softly from the sky. The north stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. Alexander stepped beside her without a sound. Together they watched the city below. "You saved more than me," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him. "What do you mean?" Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the distant mountains. "If I had never returned, the north would have fractured. Every territory would have fought to claim what remained." Emily's breath caught. She stared across the sleeping kingdom. The realization settled over her slowly. She had believed she was helping one wounded creature in the forest. She had believed her actions mattered only to him. But standing there beneath the falling snow, overlooking the countless lights scattered across the north, she finally understood the truth. Her kindness had reached farther than she could have imagined. It had not only changed one life. It had preserved an entire kingdom. The first snowfall of the season covered Northwatch in silver on the morning of the winter gathering. Every road leading to the capital was filled with visitors arriving from distant territories. Merchants decorated their storefronts with lanterns. Musicians filled the streets with bright melodies. High above the city, banners bearing the crest of the north moved gently in the crisp morning air. Emily stood near the entrance of the royal hall, her hands clasped together as she watched hundreds of guests arrive. Even now, she sometimes struggled to believe how much her life had changed. Only weeks earlier she had been an overlooked omega wandering through a frozen forest. Now she stood at the center of an event attended by leaders from every corner of the kingdom. Yet despite everything, she remained the same person she had always been. Kind, humble, quiet. The massive doors opened, and the crowd gradually moved into the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with warm golden light. Long tables stretched across the chamber. Noble families filled the seats closest to the throne, while pack leaders and council members gathered nearby. Emily took a slow breath. She had expected to remain in the background, just as she always had. But the moment Alexander entered the hall, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him. He crossed the room with calm confidence, acknowledging the assembled guests with a slight nod. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of taking his place immediately, he continued walking through the crowd. The room watched in silence. Emily felt her pulse quicken as she realized he was approaching her. One step, then another. The distance between them disappeared. Alexander stopped directly in front of her. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Emily looked up, uncertain what was happening. Then the king of the north did something no one expected. Before nobles, advisors, generals, and representatives from across the kingdom, he lowered himself onto one knee. A collective gasp swept through the room. Emily froze. For a moment she thought she must be dreaming. Alexander looked up at her, his silver eyes filled with warmth and certainty. "The North stands strong today because one person chose compassion when no one else would," he said. His voice carried clearly through the hall. When others saw a burden, she saw someone worth helping. When others turned away, she stayed. Her courage restored hope not only to me, but to every person who calls this kingdom home. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because of the attention, not because of the crowd, but because for the first time in her life, she understood that kindness was not weakness. The qualities people had mocked were the very qualities that had changed the future. Alexander rose and gently took her hand. The hall remained silent for several seconds before the first applause began. Then another, and another. Soon the entire chamber was filled with the sound. Nobles stood. Council members stood. Leaders from distant territories stood. The recognition spread through the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Emily looked around and saw respect where doubt had once existed. She saw acceptance where judgment had once lived. Most importantly, she saw hope. Later that evening, after the celebration had ended, Emily stepped onto the palace balcony overlooking the city. Snow drifted gently from the night sky. Thousands of lights sparkled below. Alexander joined her quietly. Together they stood beneath the stars, watching the peaceful kingdom stretching beyond the horizon. Emily smiled as she looked across the north. The journey had begun with a frightened omega and a chained wolf hidden in a forgotten valley. Now it ended with something far greater. Not a crown, not power, but a simple truth that would be remembered long after their story became legend. True strength is gentle, and the smallest act of kindness can change the fate of an entire world.